Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to your favorite Bronze Age Spider-Man podcast. Here comes the Spider-Cast. I am your co-host, Mike L, and as always, I'm joined by...
Joshua Mervell, and today we're going to be talking about Spider-Man comics from May of 1983.
That's right, and we've got two special guests. First, we have a returning guest. Can you introduce yourself, returning guest?
Yes, hi, my name's Adam Peltier. I'm a librarian at the Windsor Public Library and a comic book enthusiast, not to mention a bit of a Spider-Man fan, and I'm glad to be back on the Spider-Cast this week.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you're the quickest re-guest, or whatever it's called, that we've ever had. We enjoyed your guest appearance last time so much we had you back on as soon as possible. And also...
It's because I bribed you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, $20, that's all it takes. And also this week, for the first time ever, even though we've invited you before, but you kind of ditched us, but we're not bitter, don't worry about it. Can you introduce yourself to us, special guest?
I never ditched you. You.
Okay.
But anyways, my name's Dave Constantino. I also work at the library, but I do other things like music and a radio show on CJAM called Revolution Rock, also with Adam. And I like the Spidey.
Awesome. You like Spidey. Yeah, tell us, did you grow up reading Spider-Man comics or what?
Yeah, I did. I read a lot of comics, actually. Spider-Man was one that I always read. Batman was another. Superman, Green Lantern. Basically, and DC Marvel.
Okay, and just to give us an idea, a bearing, do you remember your first issue of Spidey or what the story was? Or what era?
There's two eras. The infamous clone saga.
Okay.
And then also, which I learned is actually people don't like it. And and my favorite, which is the whole Carnage Venom thing. That's where really I started reading.
Very cool. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Yeah. Okay, so we're obviously jumping back to 1983. So this is before your time, Dave. Have you read any Spider-Man comics from the 1980s?
Maybe. I read 3.
Okay. All right, this is going to be exciting then. Okay. So we're going to start off this week by reviewing the Amazing Spider-Man number 240. Once again, with the return of the Vulture. I think, Josh, we've seen the Vulture quite a bit since we've started the show, right?
Yes, yeah, we have.
All right. This week, though, it's Roger Stern teamed with John Romita Jr. again, so this is going to be a good one, I think. So basically, we open up the comic, touching base on the gang wars that are going on in Spectacular. We touch base with what's his name? Adrian Toomes?
Adrian Toomes.
Yeah, what a cool name. I know the first thing I noticed right away, did you notice, Josh, how different the art is this week?
Yeah, it is a little different, and I wonder if it's because of the inking.
100%.
It's Bob Layton for this issue.
Yes, I mean, he's most famous for doing Iron Man, but I mean, he is a very rare artist that's most famous for his inks, and it really makes this issue stand out. Like, the attention to detail is great. I really liked it, So, basically, we touch base with Adrian Toomes, and he opens up a newspaper and sees this little ad that says Bestman Electronics will be there, the High Tech Expo. And so I didn't know anything about this Bestman Electronics. I don't know if this is just been added in as a backstory, but he's really pissed about something. And so he hangs up and he's got this scheme in mind. And so we cut over to Spidey, and he's having this kind of dream about everything else that's been going on in his life, kind of summarizing what's been going on in the other Spider-Man comics. And then, we get some classic Spidey action, changing into his costume, going out his skylight. And then we touch base with this girl who's kind of been floating in and out of his life in the last few months, right? What's her name again?
Felicia.
Amy Powell.
Amy Powell, yeah.
Right. She's kind of been floating around in the background. Yeah, feel free to pipe in, Dave, anytime. It's all good. And then, basically... And again, a classic Spidey, we see him, it's a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit of Roger Stern nostalgia swinging around. He sees his old high school that he went to, right? Mm-hmm. And he hasn't been there since he graduated, so he flashes back to all his pals that he had. And then he swings over to Queens and goes back to his Aunt May's house that he grew up with, that she's recently moved back into and has turned into she calls it a halfway house, right? But
yeah,
like a retirement home kind of thing. And so he's hanging out watching TV with Nathan Lubinsky, and then he notices the Vulture on TV. So he's like, oh, I got to get out of here. So he takes off, changes it to Spidey. And then he, of course, we have fisticuffs, a great fight scene. And just, again, classic John Romita Jr. art, inked by Bob Layton. It's really more detailed and more polished than I think we've seen Romita since we've started these reviews. But we get a really good and a very long fight scene. But as usual, because it's Stern and Romita, it's very well orchestrated. It's not just, a Denny O'Neil kind of fill-in fight scene. It's very well put together. And then basically, it does end on kind of a cliffhanger. Spider-Man ends up falling supposedly to his death. So I guess this is the last issue. And also the last episode of Here Comes the Spider-Cast. So yeah, that's the end. So let's start off with you, Dave. This is your first episode. What was your first impression of this story?
Is Spider-Man okay? No. My first impression, it was good. Now that you mentioned the guy that did the drawings, I when I was reading it, like I've read Spider-Man and I know that there's always different artists, but I couldn't really identify why it was different. But I did like it. That it seems a little smoother. I don't know. But the story was interesting. The Vulture. I don't know why he was so upset about the electronics guy. He was really old now, and maybe he, didn't get his money back when he tried to return some batteries. I don't know what happened with the Vulture, but he became this powerful guy, and then Spider-Man killed him or whatever. No, he didn't kill him, but he fought him and some robots. So anyways, it was an interesting story. I have a question.
And of course there's robots.
Of course.
Right.
Vultures, robots, spiders, and other stuff. So what I wanted to ask was, a lot of these issues that you picked, they all kind of end on these like cliffhangers. Like, is that to get you sucked in to read the next time? Is that
well? You'd have to ask Roger Stern that, but I bet you it is why they did cliffhangers. Absolutely.
No sneaky.
And that's the other thing is, yeah, like it's we have to remind listeners, like, we're not picking these because for any special reason other than that they're chronological. We're doing every issue of Spider-Man in the 80s, right? So definitely we come in the middle of a story sometimes when we bring in our...
Well, they do, and I find that kind of interesting because even if you follow Spider-Man, you might not have read the Spider-Man from the 80s. Who knows when you came in, right? Like, I didn't really read the Spider-Man in the 80s. I was more in the 90s and 2000s. But
right.
They do provide little, like, hints on what happened.
Right.
But it was interesting. And something I always wondered about Spider-Man is he always changes very quickly, and he always leaves his clothes behind. Does he, like, leave his wallet in there? Like, what if someone found his wallet and they saw him leaving? They're like, oh, my God, Peter Parker is Spider-Man? What the fuck?
I don't think anyone's ever thought of that. I don't know. He definitely...
I believe that was issue 364, Spectacular Spider-Man. I don't know.
I think I know that one of the cool things they always show is he leaves his clothing webbed up. Like, if he changes in an alley, he'll leave it webbed up and go back and get it later.
That's how you know not to touch it, right? They're like, oh, there's Spider-Man's identity.
Right.
Okay, so Adam, so you just came on a few weeks ago. How does this issue compare to the last one you read?
Actually, I wasn't a huge fan of this one. To be honest, I do agree with some of the sentiment on the art. I think there's some great detail, like that opening splash page you mentioned where you have Adrian Toomes reaching for the newspaper. You can see the detail of liver spots on his hand. That's great. There's other sections, though, where Spidey gets in those sort of Spidey infamous weird positions, and it seems very unnatural and awkward. There's this schism I notice in the art between details in the facial structure looking really good and then body positions looking like bendy dolls. It's a weird thing I couldn't quite reconcile. Beyond that, the story I didn't feel was that great because you had Spider-Man fighting the Vulture. Big whoop. We've seen this before. It's happened since the 60s. And don't get me wrong, Vulture is a great villain when he's used effectively. There was just nothing about the Vulture in this issue that was not seen in even stuff that you could see in, like, the Stan Lee Ditko stuff from the 60s. For me, it was just retreading some of the same ground. Also, I do love on page 17 Spider-Man is fighting robots because comics.
Yeah, that's a good point. Josh, what's your impression of this? I mean, you've been reading Spidey now for 38 weeks, so what do you think of this one?
Right. I thought this one was pretty good. I really appreciated the fact that they didn't have to go in and explain all of the little details of why the Vulture is upset at this, Expo guy.
Sure.
We didn't have to read like 2 full pages of just backstory of how this guy's wronged him. He's the Vulture. He's evil. We get that. You can just kind of just jump into him being pissed off at somebody and start that adventure.
Sure.
But I think that it kind of stumbles when there's not much of a story connecting Spider-Man with Vulture or the events. Like, Spider-Man just kind of sees it on the news and then runs out to fight him, and then they start punching each other and Spider-Man's knocked out. So, yeah, I agree that it did kind of just turn into Spider-Man fights the Vulture. So, it was pretty good. It was still fun.
I think the thing with me is I really did like the setup, but again, even when I was summarizing the story, I noticed that, well, once you get to the fight scene, that's pretty much it. So
Yep.
virtually half the comic is Spider-Man and Vulture fighting. And so really, I think what's happened here is they've taken a story that could probably be done in 1 issue and just stretched it over 2, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Seems like it.
But I definitely like... go ahead, Dave. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I kind of, like I said, I liked it, and I do like it, but compared to the other 2 that we read, I feel this one was the weakest.
Whoa. That's blasphemy.
Interesting.
Wait a minute. The second one? Okay.
We'll talk about that in a minute. But
Not the weakest. Second weakest.
like for me, this was my favorite. But if this was your least favorite, that's cool. But I guess let me put it this way: how does this one compare to the stuff that you read in the '90s, like the Clone Saga and all that, and Carnage and all that?
I don't know. I liked it, but I felt it was kind of, I don't know. It's just something off about it for me. I did like it. Like, obviously I knew the whole Vulture story. You can kind of jump into any Spider-Man comic not really knowing exactly what transpired, just knowing that that's the bad guy. But, yeah, I don't know. I'm not very helpful in my reviews today. I realize I'm just saying words. Like, is this even usable? I don't know.
We're going to cut it all out. Okay. So, Adam, do you have anything else to say about this issue before we move on to the next one?
The only thing I want to say, to back up my point, I feel like when I was on the Spider-Cast last time, we talked about the issue where Spider-Man was confronting Gladiator.
Yes.
Right.
Well, Gladiator is kind of a B-grade villain. I didn't feel there was much progressing Spider-Man's story with that interaction, but I still felt there was more narrative meat there. You have this conflict of this villain. You have Spider-Man who doesn't actually want to fight Gladiator because he's trying to redeem himself. There's some meat there. There's something a little better in terms of storytelling quality, whereas this is just Spidey's fighting Vulture again, and... of all the good Vulture stories out there, this would not be in the top 10, probably not in the top 20. So I just feel it's not horrible. It's an enjoyable, quick read, but, would I go out of my way to recommend this to people? I'd be hesitant to.
Yeah.
I'll just ask.
I agree with that.
Yeah, one more thing though, Josh. Do you think that Bob Layton is more suited to John Romita Jr. than Jim Mooney?
I don't know. That's tough because I really do like Jim Mooney, but I really enjoyed the art in this issue. The inking, especially like you were saying, there's a lot of just like small little details added in. Like one thing that stood out to me was on Digital 6. Peter is replacing a light bulb, and you can see the writing on the light bulb, and it's not like. The panel itself is not overly detailed, but it's just like that small added detail that makes it feel real, and you buy it. So I don't always get that with Jim Mooney, so it's definitely nice to have switch up. I don't know which one I would say like better though.
Yeah, I think that maybe Jim Mooney is more graceful, but I think that Bob Layton, I appreciate a different look at his inks provide a different perspective. they show a different side of John Romita Jr. Would you recommend this issue, Josh?
You know what? I'm not sure. Maybe I'll wait till next week when we review part 2 of this story, and maybe I would recommend them together. But I don't think that, again, there was anything super special that I would go out of my way to recommend it.
Sure. Okay, Dave, would you recommend this issue?
I don't know if I would. I want to read part 2. So I guess I would. I don't know.
Well, there you go. They did their job. You know what? Again, not the best issue Spider-Man, but I would recommend it because, again, it just feels like a classic issue. Even though they did stretch out the story, I still like the style of this type of story. And again, Bob Layton's art makes it a special treat to me. So that's enough for Amazing Spider-Man. Now we're gonna jump to.
Wait, Mike.
What?
I have one thing to ask about Amazing Spider-Man before we jump.
Sure.
This just came to mind. Did anyone else find it weird that the newspaper vendor said he doesn't believe in Spider-Man? I mean, they're in the Marvel universe where there's alien invasions and gods coming to Earth, and he doesn't believe that there's a guy in a red suit swinging around New York. I just wanted to throw that out there before we move on.
The only thing I'll say is that they're in the West Coast, so as you know, Marvel superheroes all live in one city, New York, so it's possible. And this is pre-internet, so it's possible.
The Vulture should have said something. He should have said, "I don't know about that, old man. I saw Spider-Man before."
Yeah, that would fix that plot hole. Anyway, okay. So now we're going to jump to Marvel Team Up with Spider-Man and the Vision. Who's going to take this one again? Was it Dave? Yes. Dave Constantino, go ahead. Tell us what this story's about.
So the Vision is like, I don't know what he is really, but he's I guess he's good. And then there's these evil robots coming that are disguised as, well, they're not disguised, but they're all these super smart historical figures. And it's weird. And I don't know why they did that. But apparently they're being used for not for good. And Mark Twain is the leader, kind of. And the Vision,
Robot
I should
Mark
start
Twain.
by saying the Vision wants to see his wife, but instead he gets to see Mark Twain. And this fight ensues where they're trying to, like, they're in this town. It's kind of like a horror movie almost, where they're like, someone's killing someone. We gotta convict Dostoevsky or whoever that guy was. And I'm really failing at telling this story, but basically, there's a killer and it's actually a robot, and then there's more robots, and there's also a big robot, and then we get into a big battle, and Spider-Man holds off for a long time. He wants to just watch and be like, and then he has to fight everyone, and he shows that there's hope, and then Mark Twain and all the other historical robots are like, fuck evil, we'll come back later. But I don't know how else to explain it. That's probably a terrible way of explaining it, but it feels like one of those issues that is trying to, like, is the Vision, I'm assuming the Vision's from something else. I don't know. Yeah, okay.
Oh, he's from Avengers.
He's from Avengers.
It's like kind of like a crossover type thing. They're trying to be...
well, yeah, every
crossover?
issue of Marvel
Okay.
Team Up
I
is...
just thought it was another Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Okay, so it makes some more sense now. But, yeah, I don't know. It's just, it seems like one of those 80s movies where you're like, they made this, and you watched it, and then it's over. So that's how I'm going to end my review.
Oh. Okay, Josh, can you...
I couldn't have said it better myself, honestly. That's pretty much how I feel about every Marvel team up. This story was very weird and all over the place. We had this, like, weird subplot of a murderer on the loose, and it ends up being the police officer that, like, asks for their help. It's really unclear what the robots' motives are, too. Like, they're kind of good, but they're also bad. The police officer decides to start a mob to go after the robot that escapes. Instead of, like, calling the other police officers. Sure. I don't know. It's just everything everything just happens and is thrown at you all at once. And there are definitely times where I had to stop and go back a few pages and reread because I just kept getting lost because everything just started happening all at once. Like this one for me was a tough read. I when I finally got through it, I still was sitting there like, what the hell just happened? I don't understand anything that just happened.
Yeah, Adam. Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. I'll save my review for the last. But Adam, what's your take on it?
I actually thought this was interesting. When we were talking the last week I was on, we mentioned how this particular writer, I think it's DeMatteis or DeMatteis.
Yeah, J.M. DeMatteis, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, he has a kind of a faux Stan Lee style where it's very kind of officious and pompous, but it doesn't have quite the same flair or charm that Stan Lee's prose does. It comes across as a bit more pretentious. Yeah. So writing wise, it's not the best, which is a shame because I actually didn't mind the issue being a bit more philosophical. One aspect, Dave, I know you were kind of rushing through, but one thing you didn't touch upon was the fact that these robots, the Mark Twain, the Lincoln, the Dostoevsky robots, they were created for evil. They were abandoned by their creator. Now they just kind of want to learn how it is to be human. That's why they approached Vision, because Vision is a type of synthetic android. So they want to learn what it's like to be human. And then you have this huge fight between Spider-Man and Big Robot at the end. Big Robot with a ball in his hand and appearing to wear a diaper. I'm not sure about that guy, but that conflict, I thought, that actually had some good philosophical meat to it. That whole idea that these robots, they're not just, cut out cardboard evil villains. They're trying to be good guys, and you have this mob confronting them, and they basically walk away saying, we don't know if we can become human. We don't know if we want to become human. I think conceptually, this is a really good theme. I think this was interesting. The problem, as always, is in the execution, because clunky writing, inking is not the greatest in this issue, to say the least. And then I know Josh talked about the killer storyline with Bob being the killer. That just felt very unsatisfying in the end. Yeah. And I felt like the killer storyline was kind of forgotten halfway through because there was all this stuff happening with robots and the Vision. I feel like it was really easy to overlook that whole storyline, and not to mention the fact for a team up, Spider-Man and Vision don't really do anything together. They share like 3 panels and that's it.
I was excited when the story started because I thought, like, when we opened up with the Vision kind of just sitting by himself thinking, and I was like, oh, finally, just focus on a character, keep it clean, let's get inside the Vision's head, and then we introduce a robot. And it's just like, granted, Vision is an android, but my point is it's almost like for just 2 minutes we had the beginnings of what could have been a good story, but it's almost like DeMatteis was like, oh, I forgot I'm writing a superhero comic. I got to throw in some crap. So he throws this in, and then the rest of the story, it's just, again, it's like, was he really burning to tell a story where we had Dostoevsky as a robot and all these other famous people's robots? It's just... again, it's like there's always, like, he is a good writer. He has skill. There's always good themes, but it's like, again, he just throws a bunch of crap at a wall to see what sticks. That's what I feel like every issue is. Even again, when it starts out good, it always falters in the execution. Mm-hmm. The only thing I'll say again is it still feels, it's like a bad hamburger, but it's still a hamburger. It still feels good. The art is still decent, but I can't explain it. It's like I didn't hate reading it, but I didn't enjoy reading it. I couldn't follow it. It's like, it's that, we talked about this on previous episodes where it's like the writing's pushing me out and Roger Stern's writing is pulling me in. I think that's the key
Adam
difference.
was right about, it had some interesting ideas. It just wasn't really executed that well. Yeah. And what's the deal with the big blue fist there, the robot? Is he in other issues? Is he from the, I don't know. He just appears? Yeah.
this Alpha or whatever his name is. I don't know.
Oh, I thought it was Bluefish.
Oh, he has a name? I was calling him Ballbot.
No, it says Alpha. His only appearance is this issue, Alpha.
Wow.
So that's what I mean. It's like
interesting. Yeah, he's with those androids, right? Like when Vision first goes to the abandoned building that he feels like compelled to go to, that's who first confronts him there, and then I don't think we see him until the end conflict where he shows up and starts like fighting Vision and Spider-Man, and then once the other androids walk away, he walks away with them. So I think he's also one of the abandoned robots, but like I guess more of like a like primitive version of these androids. And like that could have been an interesting storyline where like they kind of fall in between this primitive like caveman robot and Vision, who is this like super smart, emotional superhero robot, and like have that conflict within them of not knowing who they are, and they were made by the same creator of this caveman. Why shouldn't they act like him too? And then kind of have that like those moments and that make that what the story is about. But instead we have this weird subplot with this murderer that doesn't really like matter in the end. I don't remember. Does he have a motive for killing people, or is he just killing people? I don't remember them ever talking about why it's him.
Oh, he hates people. That's it. That's what he says. Everyone deserves to die because people are the worst. Like, pretty much verbatim, That's what he says in the issue.
Yeah.
You know, I will say about this, I feel like the issue is two different stories trying to be told. You have this almost in the heat of the night story about Spider-Man coming to a small town, trying to help the police force solve this murder. And then you have this almost Raymond Bradbury-esque story about these robots wanting to become human. And neither really gel with each other. I think both are kind of interesting in their own way. And I will say, at least conceptually, this issue is much stronger than the issue of Marvel Team Up that we read together those 2 weeks ago. But yeah, no, there was just a sense of almost too many ingredients in the pot here.
Yeah, I definitely, I would never recommend this, and I never want to read it again. That's my take on it. Josh, what do you think?
No, I'm in the same boat. The problem with Marvel Team Up is it always feels like a commercial for a comic that's not Spider-Man. Spider-Man never feels like he belongs in these issues, and the stories never really flesh together properly. And I really don't like this book. I really don't like Marvel Team Up.
No,
there's only been a few issues out of all 40 that we've read so far that have been like somewhat enjoyable.
I agree, and we've even gone through 2 different writers, and it still hasn't really improved.
Yeah,
and 3 different artists. Yeah, I know. I agree. So, Dave, what's your take compared to '90s Spidey? How do you compare this one?
I don't know. I don't like it. It's okay. Here's my question. I wouldn't recommend it just because it's kind of hard to follow, to be honest. If you're following comics and you know everything that's going on, maybe you'll then go, okay. But I still think if you were following at the time, you'd read this and go, oh, God. But how many of these Marvel team-ups were there? Do they still do this?
No, there was 150.
150?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, like Adam was saying and some of the people were saying here, it definitely has some really cool, interesting ideas. I think if they would have maybe focused on some of those a little more, like they could have just focused on the whole robot thing, about the philosophical thing. I think that would have been a super stronger story. But I don't know if that's the point of these comics. They seem like, I don't know, maybe it was Josh that was saying, they seem like kind of like advertisements for other things.
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, yeah.
You know what? And this comic has never been reprinted, and I think there's a reason for that. I don't think anyone wants to read this, unfortunately. So with that, we're going to jump to Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, 78. And Adam, you can tell us what this one's about.
Okay, so going through the issue, this is pardon me, this is just continuing the story that was going on in Spectacular at the time. The gang war is happening between Owl and Doc Ock. And here we're finally revving up for the big battle. It's getting close. Spider-Man starts the issue sneaking into Felicia Hardy's hospital room, who is otherwise known as the Black Cat, to give her some flowers. And there is an enclave of policemen coming in, shocked. How could you sneak in here? So, of course, there's a little bit of conflict between the police and Spider-Man, but it's quickly resolved. And Spider-Man and Black Cat have a bit of a character moment. Black Cat talks about essentially a near-death experience she had while being in the hospital, where she saw her father in a dream. And then her and Spider-Man just show affection. When Felicia's mom walks in, Spider-Man takes that as his cue to web away. And at that point, Spider-Man is basically coming to terms with the fact that he has to fight Dr. Octopus in a day. And he feels that he might not win. And he's thinking, is this it for me? I might actually have to prepare for the fact that this will be my last battle. So he spends the issue going through all these different interactions. He asks J. Jonah Jameson, JJJ, for top dollar for his pictures of Spider-Man. He goes around talking to his college professor, telling him basically to shove it, that he doesn't care about all his criticisms that he has over Parker's work. And he has this basically last meal with his friends, all under the guise and this knowledge that this will probably be his last fight. I mentioned The Last Supper. There's even an image that kind of mimics that on one of the pages. Anyway, as the issue goes on, he also sees his Aunt May again to give a very warm, heartfelt farewell to her until he returns to the hospital. He is saying goodbye to Felicia, and he's almost about to remove his mask, where she says, "No, show me your face after you win, after you come back from this battle," showing that she has hope that he'll succeed. And then the issue ends with him coming out the window to see Doc Ock climbing up the side of the building, to be continued in the next issue. So there we are, my very brief synopsis of Spectacular Spider-Man this week.
I gotta say, I don't like the idea of stretching this out yet another issue, probably 3 or 4 issues past when it should have ended, but the way they did it was actually good. And I gotta admit that I think your summary made me like it even more, because I was getting really fed up with this, but after hearing your review or your summary, I was like, actually it was pretty good. And as I flipped through the issue and looked at the art again, the art was even better than I remember. So yeah, definitely better than I thought as I was reading it. Josh, what do you think?
No, I have the same sentiment as you, Mike. I think that the thing is, too, is they've stretched out this Felicia Hardy being in the hospital story for way too many issues. So, like, it almost feels like at this point a little too late. Like, I wish this is the story that we got from the beginning. But we've had Felicia in the hospital, and then some villain comes in and tries to kill her, and then she, like, just as she's, like, getting better, and she's back in, intensive care. And then she's finally feeling better, and then something else happens, and she's in intensive care again. And even before that, like, every time she appears, she dies, or she disappears. So it's just, like, it's just so tiring to see her, like, constantly on the brink of death. And Peter kind of, like, having this, inner conflict all the time. So I think it was really well done in the story. I think that personally I'm just, like, over it. But I think this is the best I've seen of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those things, it's like the law of diminishing returns. Like, yeah, it's decent, but we don't care anymore. Right? Right. So Adam, what's your take on it?
I don't want to overstate it, but I kind of love this issue.
Okay.
This had everything I wanted from a Spider-Man issue from this era, which was character development. We have Peter Parker, after years of just dogging it with JJJ, finally going up to Jonah and saying, "No, you give me top dollar, or I'm going to expose this film, and you're not going to have all this footage." That shows a certain intensity, a certain well, I have to say, assertiveness from Peter I haven't seen. And the thing I usually don't like when Spider-Man's written poorly is that Peter is just so self-loathing and he's insufferable. Here, he's going through conflict, but he's actually doing something about it. He's trying to have some sort of reconciliation with his friends, with his Aunt May. And then beyond that, like the character moments between him and Felicia are genuinely sweet. They actually show that there's a substantial relationship between them. It's just not Peter sitting next to the bed of a sexy lamp where she's not doing anything. She actually has some agency. That scene where she tells Peter, don't show me your face, show it to me after you fight him, just gives that sort of confidence he needs to battle him. And I just thought, this is an arc that not only shows how you could write a good Spider-Man story in the 80s, but you could still write a good one now, where Spider-Man is actually facing the gravity of what he does, where he's thinking, I could die. That it actually made me know that Spider-Man felt fear. And even though I know he lived, I mean, obviously there's been 30, 40 plus years of Spider-Man comics after this, it's still that thing where I've genuinely felt worried for him going through that. And I thought that was a sign of effective writing. The art was really well done. The coloring, the inking compared to the last issue of Spectacular. And I just, overall, there was nothing I could complain about. Some of the dialogue had that 80s clunkiness to it in parts, but overall, this was fantastic. I really loved this, and I think this is a good way to show how to write a good Spider-Man story.
I think I have to point out, too, that the art, it's still Al Milgrom, but he's not doing full pencils, he's doing layouts, and Jim Mooney's doing the finished art. So I think what's happening is Al Milgrom is kind of roughly placing the figures, but Jim Mooney is going in and drawing everything. That's why you'll notice the art, like Adam said, is much better this issue. Because I think it's essentially drawn by Jim Mooney. I mean, Al Milgrom's storytelling has always been decent, but here it looks kind of plain, but I think that lends itself to the feel of this book. Like, Jim Mooney is a Silver Age artist, and I think it gives it that Silver Age feel. There's one page that really stands out, and that's the one where Dr. Octopus is first in the sewer on page Digital 13. That's so well done. I thought that was excellent. But there's one person we haven't heard from yet. Sorry, Dave. Dave, what's your take on this issue?
This was my favorite of the three. I really liked this. I always really liked the Dr. Octopus villain storyline. I don't know why. Even as a kid, I loved it. But the story was strong. I really liked it. I agree with a lot of Adam's points. One of my favorite parts, drawing-wise, was when they showed the Blackcats Dream, the way they drew it. I really liked that. The colors and the way they did it didn't seem lame or whatever, like sometimes, a dream sequence or whatever can be done anyway, but I like the way that was done. And I felt it was the strongest, actually, of the three that we read, and I really liked it. To be honest, I don't know too much about the whole Black Cat, Peter Parker, Spider-Man thing.
Well, what I was going to say is I think one of the reasons why you two probably liked it more than Josh and I is that, like we were saying, we've kind of seen this story kind of duplicated like 5 times in a row.
Right.
And so I think the impact is diluted for us. But I can see that if it was your first or second time reading a chapter in this story, you'd be able to appreciate its strengths more. But I think we're kind of just dulled to the pain, Right. I definitely think it's good. But after hearing you two both talk about it, it makes me appreciate it more. But I definitely think we need to wrap this up. And thank God next issue is the conclusion of this storyline. Even though I thought we already had the conclusion in 75. This is now another conclusion.
Yeah, I don't think it was the last issue. I think it was the issue before. Doc Ock is the one that knocked Black Cat out to put her in the hospital. But then Spider-Man came in and saved her and ripped off his arms. So she's in the hospital. Somebody tried to kill her, so she went into ICU and then recovered. And then Doc Ock shows up to rip out her oxygen and then runs away again. It just and so she slips into a coma again, and then now she's finally awake for the third time, and it's just it just feels so it feels played out at this point for me. I 100% agree, though. I think the Peter Parker stuff is very strong in this issue. Him standing up to Jameson, him saying goodbye to his friends and realizing that, like, the weight of the situation, and if he really wants to take him out once and for all to save the woman that he loves, it might mean his own life. So I really love that side of the story. It's a shame that I feel like the reason why it's happening we've seen over and over again. But yeah, it's like having pizza every day for a month, and then the last day of the month you have the best pizza ever. It's also kind of like, yeah, it's pizza.
That's that's kind of like the 11 times I've been to Taco Bell since quarantine started. Yeah, it kind of starts to lose its appeal. But anyway, yeah, I think I'll have to agree with, I believe, Dave and Adam. I think this might be the best issue. I don't know. It's between this and Amazing, definitely, because Team Up was terrible.
I think objectively it's the best one.
Yeah.
But I think Amazing I enjoyed reading better just because it felt a little bit more fresh to me. From what I've been reading lately.
Yeah, so I guess the next question is, Dave, overall, what's your impression of these particular Spidey comics versus the ones you read as a kid?
I think they all have qualities to them that make them good. Well, most of them. Now that I'm just kind of remembering, there was always, like, how many different Spider-Mans were there? There was Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man. There was a couple, right?
Yeah, a couple, yeah.
At one point it was 11. There was one I used to buy all the time because I used to like the stories better, and I can't remember which one it was. It might have been Amazing Spider-Man. I don't remember.
Probably, but it was different writers at that point.
It was different, right? Yeah, different writers, different time, different art. But I don't know. I still think, like I said, the first one I read, I was like, okay, this one's not bad. Second one I read, I'm like, oh. And then the last one I read, I'm like, oh, this is really great. So, I don't know. It kind of felt like, it was like a Spider-Man sandwich. In the middle was like spoiled mayonnaise or something. The top layer was like bread.
A lot of food analogies this week. I think we're all hungry, eh?
Yeah. Maybe the top layer was like bread that's like still good, but like it's getting close to getting mold. But the last piece is like fresh bread. So it's like a combination of everything you want and don't want in one 3-pack. That
sounds exactly like the contents of my kitchen right now. Okay. So, yes.
You know what that means, listeners? Another night of Taco Bell for Mike.
Yes, you got that right. Okay. So I definitely would like to thank Dave Constantino and Adam Peltier for joining us. We'll definitely, we'll be glad to have you guys back on again.
Yeah, of course.
You'll be happy to know these stories all continue next month, so feel free to read them on your own, even if you're not on the show. And then, Josh, you can take it from here.
Yeah, we also want to thank the listeners for listening to the podcast. It really helps when you leave us a review or a comment. So you can find us pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. So Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can find us on YouTube. Or you can, leave us a review or send us a message over at Twitter at HCT Spidercast. If you guys send us a tweet, we'll make sure to like and respond, and we want to keep that conversation going and see what you guys think about the episodes and the issues we're talking about. So, yeah.
That's right, and every week we review 3 to 4 Bronze Age Spider-Man comics. Next week we'll be doing some guest appearances, so please be sure to join us for that. And until next Monday, this has been Here Comes the Spidercast.
All right, see you then.